Well, welcome to this, the latest installment in the series of dialogues with whistleblowers and witness bearers. I'm in Lilongwe in Malawi to support a whistleblower client whose disclosures of high-level corruption in South Sudan are about to hit the fan. It has the potential to be a seismic event in the geopolitics of Africa and, in fact, the world, because it involves oil and energy. I was engaged by PLAF, which is a platform for the protection of whistleblowers in Africa, to assess the risk of further retaliation against them and to develop strategies and tactics to mitigate those. So we're going to hear the story of someone whose normal professional occupation is, in a sense, to blow the whistle. He's a chartered accountant and an auditor, and that is what they are trained to do, to audit the books of companies, and if they see irregularities and worse, obvious criminal wrongdoing, their job is to bring these to the attention of the boards of directors, who must act on them. And if their boards of directors don't, and there are serious ethical issues and criminal conduct, well, what else do they do? Well, the person that I'm about to interview will tell you what he did. When auditors do their job with integrity, they should be praised, and the firms they work for would normally reward them with promotion and incentives to encourage others to do the same, to do an honest day's work. Well, Biswick Tiyamalu Kaswaswa is such a person, and after an impressive career with Deloitte, was recruited by a South Sudanese energy company known as Trinity to serve as their financial manager, working in their head office in Juba in South Sudan. And that was 4 years ago. But the only influential person who seems to have recognized that good accountants blow the whistle on irregularities happened to be the judge, who was delivering judgment on whether there was enough prima facie evidence to convict Tia for allegedly having stolen $350,000 from his employer, Trinity. Well, fortunately, Amnesty International had intervened and found a local human rights lawyer, Godfrey Bula, to represent Tia. Godfrey did a superb job. Now, when the judge handed down judgment, he said that the only documentary evidence that had been brought before the court showed that Tia was, in fact, an accountable accountant, someone that any reputable company or audit firm would want to employ. Now, this is an extensive interview because Tia's life story so far, and he's only 41, really ought to be shown as a case study in universities to, in fact, to students of any profession where truth and accountability matter. But as you will hear, instead of reward, he has suffered the most brutal retaliation. Another scapegoat cast out to join the growing herd of whistleblower clients that I have found myself working with in the deserts of stigma and isolation. I need to warn viewers that this is not for young children, but it is for teenagers and young adults and anyone who needs a role model of someone who exemplifies that biblical teaching that the truth will set you free. Now, I've always understood that in its psychological, spiritual sense of being set free from anxiety, guilt, shame, and depression, when one's eyes are then opened to the reality of the divine mystery of love. But Tia's story is that, but it is also literally a story of how he was set free from Juba Central Prison in March 2020 after spending 16 months in an ordeal that no one would want to find themselves having to endure. The irony of it is that he had gone to Juba and accepted this job because he thought it would give him the opportunity, as was in his contract, to teach at the local university to young accounting students. Little did he realize that he would do teaching, but it would be to prisoners on death row in the prison to help them pass their primary school level examinations. What kept him going is that he knew he was not guilty, and that was the truth. And in insisting upon it, that was what ultimately not only set him free, but set him onto a new path. He knew that the charges were trumped up, and that nothing they could do to him, torture, intimidation, both physical and psychological, would induce him to say otherwise. Alethea, so you're a teacher, clearly. Now teach me, help me understand how this dramatic story unfolded, but maybe just to start, where did this teaching inclination come from? And teach us about yourself.
Thank you, John, for being with me here. It's my pleasure to have a person like you around me. I was born 41 years ago from parents who were primary school teachers. So teaching was in our blood, and teaching is in my blood. It is not something that I pursued, but it comes naturally, and it's my passion. I was born in 1981. My parents, who I've said were primary school teachers. In fact, my father retired as a headmaster. So we were growing up in a family where every day was about teaching. I was brought up in an environment whereby we believe that honesty, hard work, and integrity is what is very critical in somebody's life. I finished my school, my primary school, in 1995, and I was selected into CCP Sunday School. CCP is one of the key churches in Malawi. I went to a mission school. I moved to another public Sunday school. Because at that time, I was inspired by one of the candidates who scored very well in his final exams of Form 4. So I relocated from Blanta, so I moved from Isha Sunday School to Mulanje Sunday School. It's a public school owned by the Malawi government. I did well in my Form 4 exams. For those who passed Malawi School Living Certificate of Education, MSc, the percentage rate was only 13%. 13%, yes. Right. So I was privileged. I was one of the students who did well and succeeded in doing Bachelor of Accountancy degree at the Polytechnic. I finished my Bachelor of Accountancy degree in 2004. But during the period that I was in college, I was also awarded for being an outstanding student. I was awarded by the company called Continental Discount House, where they were selecting best 3 candidates from our course and those that were studying Bachelor of Economics from Chasaboji under the University of Malawi as well. So I was rewarded during my time at school for being an outstanding student. I did not struggle to get a job because I was a performing student in our class. I secured a job with Deloitte, Malawi. That was way before we graduated. I graduated in 2005 after I was already recruited by Deloitte. I sat for my ACC exams in 2005 and 2006. I only sat for 2 sittings and I qualified as a chartered accountant in August 2006. I believed in hard work, and I believe that everything is possible once you believe, once you work hard. Then in late 2007, I relocated to Barbados in the Caribbean under Deloitte. I joined Deloitte Barbados as an external auditor up to 2011 when I came back home. When I was home here, I worked with a number of companies until I got an opportunity to work with Trinity Energy Ltd in South Sudan.
You were, obviously a rising star. They could see your potential. Now, just give us the timeline of what happened from June 2018, when you were called to another adventure.
It was way back in 2018, early 2018, when I got a call from my colleague. We were together at college. We were studying together, a bunch of accountants at the University of Malawi. He said, "Are you interested to go and work in South Sudan?" I said, "Yes, why not? After all, you know me that I've been working in a lot of countries, not only Malawi, but I also worked in Barbados in the Caribbean." So I applied for the job. The application was addressed directly to Mr. Robert Ndedza. Robert Ndedza was the former Chief Executive Officer of the National Oil Company of Malawi, NOCMA. I was shortlisted for the interviews. We did the interviews in June, and I was offered a job. It was a very lucrative job. The interview was done successfully. There were a number of people who attended the interview for my position, and I matched the overall good candidate to have that job. My salary was $7,000 a month. I was being provided accommodation. We were provided food. I was given air tickets to see my family back in Malawi. Then I left for South Sudan. But what I saw was different from what I read. Although our CEO informed us that you are going to a country different from Malawi. I did my own research as well before the interviews, and I did also another research about this institution after the interviews. The name of the company that gave me the job is called Trinity Energy Ltd. It's a local South Sudanese company that sells petroleum products, owned by a South Sudanese called Emmanuel Maduti. And some of the shareholders in the company, Anne Kuteri. Anne Kuteri is a Kenyan, a wife to Emmanuel Maduti, and Richard Raja. Richard Raja is an Indian. Yeah, so I left Malawi, but I was in Juba in the afternoon. They welcomed me. They showed me where I'm sleeping. Robert, with the Trinity, were not only recruiting for my post, but they were also recruiting for operations manager. They recruited an operations manager, Mr. Pride Chikaonda. So there were two of us leaving Malawi to Juba to work for Trinity Energy Ltd. We were staying in Kororo behind the American embassy. We started working. Trinity Energy Ltd, at that time when I was there, they were selling diesel and petrol. But also, they were middle guys who were buying crude oil from the government of South Sudan and selling it to other companies. And the company that I know that they were selling this oil, crude oil, was Glencore, because I was one of the persons who were preparing invoices to Glencore. This was the business of Trinity Energy Ltd. Now, in terms of the diesel and petrol, they had two revenue streams. They were selling fuel at filling stations, so that is retail basis. And also, they were selling fuel on wholesale. So if you own a filling station, you could come to Trinity Energy Ltd and buy a truck, which was normally 30,000 liters. And apart from those other customers, they were also selling the same product, petrol and diesel, to government institutions. And one of them was the South Sudan Defense Force, which was the army. They were supplying the army. But also, they were supplying the office of the vice president, the office of the president, even in the Ministry of Petroleum. So there was a connection, indeed a very good connection between Trinity Energy Ltd and government officials. That's briefly what they were doing. So, for the company to be able to meet the demand, they had also a depot in Nesitu where they were storing, I'm sure up to now, they have the depot there where they are storing huge quantities of diesel and petrol. And my colleague, the operations manager, Bright Chikaonda, was based in C2 as well, because he was responsible for the operations. When I reviewed the systems, the internal control environment, I found out that there are a lot of issues that have to be addressed. Then my strategy was to resolve short-term challenges and then implement long-term strategies to ensure that the organization is running smoothly. If the organization is making a payment, the payment itself must be authorized. You cannot just make a payment anyhow, right? It must be authorized, it must be approved. Okay. There are segregation of duties, there are even physical controls. Once the controls are effective, are well implemented in an organization, then issues of inaccuracies in financial reporting could be reduced. And for you to have a proper corporate governance structure that you can have in an organization to ensure that you've got a very good, effective financial reporting system. How can you ensure objectivity in financial reporting? By ensuring that you've got proper controls. Everyone in the organization is aware of the transaction. Okay? I carried out an assessment during my first 2 weeks, and I issued a report to management through the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Robert Ndeza. And Mr. Robert Ndeza had time to sit down with this report with Emmanuel Ayimadut. He also called me. We sat down together. So we went through the report, and I highlighted a number of key issues in my report. One of the critical issues was a huge presence of cash in filling stations, which was very shocking. So I reasoned with the chairman, the CEO, to say, I don't find it reasonable to have huge sums of money in the filling stations. And I told them, to me, this is a risky area. This gives me a red flag. So they asked me, why are you saying that, Biswick? We don't see anything wrong with us keeping money in the filling stations, huge sums of money. I told them, number one, there are no cameras in the filling stations. Money is susceptible to theft. Employees can easily steal that money. Number two, you are in filling stations. Anything can happen. Fire, there are no proper fire extinguishers in the filling station. We are dealing with a product that can easily catch fire. So we can have that money bent and lost. Thirdly, here in South Sudan, everyone is moving with a gun. You don't know whether he's a security officer or not. So the chances of being robbed are very high. So there is no security. So they said, what are we supposed to do? They said, let us negotiate with the banks so that we can transfer all the money to the banks. They said, if you are okay with that, you go ahead. There was also another area which I also highlighted in the report, that there should be proper accountability of the funds. Because how they were in the filling stations, what they were doing is they were issuing a voucher. How many liters of fuel do you want? I need 10 liters. So they'll issue a voucher. Once they issue a voucher to the customer will go to the filling station and have fuel in his motorcycle or in his car. Okay. At the end of the day, there was no reconciliation between the vouchers and the cash that was collected. Because the vouchers that have been issued and the cash that were collected were supposed to match. And the liters that were issued are supposed to match with the vouchers that have been issued. So those reconciliations were not being done. So there was no proper audit trail. Now, although they were keeping huge chunks of money in the filling stations, but there were some funds that were transferred to the bank. Now, to have an audit trail of how much funds have been transferred to the bank, there was no that audit trail. So you couldn't trace this money that has been deposited to the bank. Where is it coming from? Which filling station is it coming from? Who took it? So everything was done without following proper procedures. So the chairman gave me a go ahead and said, okay, that's fine. Go ahead and implement all these things. But when I started implementing this, there were objections from Annie Gute and Richard Raja and the Indians that Richard Raja brought. Anne Kutere was a Kenyan and was bringing Kenyan people to work with her. Richard Raja was an Indian and was bringing Indians to work with him. Robert Ndenza was a Malawian and brought Malawians to work with him. We went with a positive intention, because even when he was talking to us, he told us that, yes, I've been working there, but this company to me is not a professional company. So I want you to bring professionalism in this company. That's why my first step was to implement, to have a proper internal control system. I inquired about the policies. Do you have a human resource policy? Do you have a financial policies and procedures manual? That wasn't on the ground. So to me, the first step was to build that and have it approved by the board, and we started implementing that. I went to banks. I went to Standard Bank. I went to KCB. I went to Equity. I told them, we've got money in our filling stations and we want to start depositing. One of the issues that Richard Raja, Anne Kutere, and the Indians that were working there raised was that banks are not accepting South Sudanese pounds. That's why they're keeping those money in the filling station. But I personally went to the banks and talked to the banks to say, is it true that you guys don't accept money? South Sudanese pounds say, no, Biswick, we are accepting money. So are you telling me that I can wipe all this money and bring to the banks? They said, yes. The only challenge that we have is because your money is a lot of money. What we'll do is we'll make an arrangement. You just give us an estimate amount of South Sudanese pounds that you have collected. We'll count it for you in the place of the camera. Once you agree with those amounts, we'll deposit that amount into the bank. I said, there is no problem. It's better for you to collect this money, count for us, and then you deposit in the bank. And my CEO was happy with this. The ACO was happy with this. But Richard Raja and Anne Kutere were not happy with that arrangement. I didn't even understand why they were not happy with that arrangement. But I was a finance manager. I implemented it. I went to all the filling stations, Kudele, one in Juba, one at Bew Farm. I even bought the metallic boxes. And I was involved in the whole process. They were even threatening me. They will shoot you. They will know that you are transferring money. I said, no. There is security here. The filling station is the security. And this is the security that are going to escort us to the filling station, to the bank, to deposit the money. Then the system started working. But while I was wiping out all this money, I found out there were some dollars in the filling station. I said, where are these dollars coming from? When you guys are selling the fuel in the filling station marked in pounds, how do we have the dollars here? I never had a correct answer on that one. But I said, okay, no problem. I assume that this money belongs to Trinity Energy Ltd. So whether it is South Sudanese pounds, whether it's dollars, I'm wiping all this money and I'm depositing them to the bank. Fortunately, we had both South Sudanese pounds bank accounts as well as dollar accounts. By doing that, I didn't know that I'm stepping on the head of the snake. Not on the head, but I was stepping in the tail of the snake.
Okay. I wish it was the head.
Yeah, I wish I was stepping on the head, because it wouldn't twist. It would be a very good story. So I did this exercise and we made progress. And now, after that, I implemented a control. I said, all the day sales that have been done during the given day, they must be deposited the following day by 9 o'clock. So anyone who is not going to do this is not in compliance with our controls. The chairman was happy. We train the people, we train the filling station managers how they can implement these controls. We design templates on how to reconcile and everything to ensure that we have got controls on the ground, we have got figures at the filling stations and everything. Some filling stations were doing the reconciliations, some filling stations are not doing the reconciliations. But I kept on pushing and pushing and pushing. But guess what? There was rejection from a number of filling stations. To me, I couldn't even understand. While we were working, there were a number of issues that were being raised. Like there was some resistance, especially from Richard Raja and Alethea. They were resisting us, both me and the chief executive officer, as well as right at Nesitu. So they had to find issues with us. Every day there were issues. Oh, you Malawians are lazy. Oh, you Malawians were paying you a lot of money. Let's review their contract. So they were finding a lot of flimsy excuses. And they kept us changing us from one working environment to another. They moved us from Kololo and they sent us to Malakia office. Then from Malakia, we have to work in Nesitu. From Nesitu, we have to come back. You know, there was a time when our CEO left Juba and came to Malawi for tombstone and veiling. He literally had his leave approved by the chairman, but he only spent 3 days and they started pushing me, where's the CEO? But I said, why are you asking for the CEO? I thought the CEO's leave was approved by the chairman. No, he's supposed to be here. You know, so there was that pressure, which I did not understand. Until later on, I started now realizing to say, all right, there is something wrong going on in this organization. There was a time where they were telling us to issue invoices to Glencore, but you issue the invoice, and when someone here is standing, the moment we finish issuing the invoice, they take the invoice and send it without even keeping a copy in our file. That was very strange. How can you send an invoice from the finance department and you don't have a copy of the invoice? I remember I issued 2 invoices. They were for the value of $60 million. And in Malwa, there is a guy called Malwa. Soon after issuing the invoice, he took the invoice. You know, so lots of things were happening, but for you to understand what is going on, it really took a lot of thinking for you to understand. There was a day when I was told to raise $400,000. So the chairman himself, Ako Emmanuel Ayi Madud, called me and said, Biswick, we need to raise $400,000. How much money do you have in the bank account? I said, we have got around $90,000. Go and withdraw that money. So I had to go and withdraw money from the bank. And then I met Malwa at the Ministry of Finance. And he had collected some funds, a total of $400,000. And when we went there, the cashier was refusing to collect that money. We had to go to the Director of Finance, Mr. Sam, and he instructed the cashier to say, issue the receipt. I have got instructions from the minister to say that you should issue this receipt. So the guy was saying, why should I issue a receipt when the money is not coming to the Minister of Finance? Say, it is an instruction of the minister, meaning the Minister of Finance, that you should issue a receipt, and then once you issue the receipt, and this money must go to this, we should give this individual. The individual who was there was coming from the office of the Vice President. So the cashier said, how should I write? What should I write in the receipt? Because this money is not being collected by the Ministry of Finance. He said, you should write this as a loan from Trinity Energy Ltd. So the government, through the Ministry of Finance, was getting a loan of $400,000 cash. So that's what I witnessed in South Sudan.
How many months was this from the time you had started? You started in June, July, August as well?
There were a lot of activities. There were a lot of activities that were happening. Like this event of $400,000, I witnessed this one in October. It was in October, I think so. October. We were having retaliations, dissatisfactions, and this was killing us inside. And there was a night one day when Robert told me to say, I want to talk to you. He said, there's this email from Alethea. to say that they want to institute an audit. If they are going to find out that trucks of fuel have been lost, they are going to kill us. That was the email that destroyed me. And Robert was literally crying to say, Biswick, right now, I have no option, but I have to go back home. I'll start over again. And in fact, he even told me to say, the chairman, Ako Emmanuel, he has called me and has told me that he does not want to find you here. Fortunately, Bright was already in Malawi. He was also on holiday. He had also a tombstone unveiling for his late wife. And I remember in that email, Anne Kutere said, it is good that Bright is already in Malawi, and tell him that should never come back here in South Sudan. So there are many things that are happening.
But what about the external auditors? I mean, didn't you have any scrutiny from agencies that are there to ensure accountability?
They were audited before, but the audit was not completed. They were edited by Ernst & Young from Kampala, Uganda. And I remember I was assigned by the directors to meet auditors in Kampala. I went to Kampala to meet the auditors together with Swaran Pandey, who was the group finance manager. We had a meeting, we requested the internal audit, we requested the external auditors in Kampala to complete the audit for the previous years, but not 2018, 2016. They were auditing in 2013, before the war. But the response that we got from the auditors, they told us that they can comfortably do the audit starting in November of 2018. So we were waiting for the Ernst & Young to come in and audit. But surprisingly, they instituted internal auditors to audit. They outsourced internal auditors, AE Excellency, to audit the company during the period that we were on the ground. And I started having meetings with the internal auditors who said, no problem, and we were ready for the audit. Those are the auditors that I remember.
Perhaps they brought you in to give the appearance that they were bringing in a competent financial professional so that they could at least get away with an audit. But then when you started doing your job to make sure it was something that the external auditors would find to be above board, things started going wrong.
Excellent, that's true, because remember I told you that when we were being recruited, they say that we are recruiting professional people to create the professional environment in Trinity Energy Ltd. That's why I came with all that energy to make sure that this organization has got a sound control environment. It was my expectation that at the end of the year, we have to carry out an extensive internal audit because it's an international company. How can you have loans when you don't have audited accounts?
So it seems that October 2018 was a threshold point where you suddenly became aware that, hey, there needs to be a public disclosure. I need to alert and effectively blow the whistle.
You know, there's something that you need to understand on corporate governance. You know, they say that if you want to create a proper internal control environment, it starts with the attitude of executive management. When executive management has got a political will to implement the controls, then things will be okay. If there's one member in the executive management or directors are not happy with the internal controls that you are putting there, you must know that you are in danger. Because, first of all, directors should not have integrity issues in terms of internal controls. Because if a director is using that system to benefit, or he's exercising, or she's exercising, or she's doing some fraud, then they cannot be happy with the internal control. You could see that there was an unwillingness. There was only one person who was happy with what we were doing. But there were two people Annie and Richard Raj, who were not happy with what we were doing. Until I realized later on that, oh, come on, these people are benefiting from this.
And did you have a company secretary?
There was no company secretary because at that time we were building up. That's why I say I asked on human resource policy, financial and accounting procedures manual. There was nothing on the ground, so we were developing everything there. And if you look what the qualifications of the people that they recruited, it was so questionable. Now, let me bring to you to some of the key things which were happening in the company. When I joined the company had a letter of credit with Afrexim Bank. The LOC was for $30 million. But this LOC that was issued by the Afrexim Bank was supposed to have a collateral. And Trinity Energy Ltd got a collateral from the government of South Sudan. And guess what? What was the collateral? The collateral was the crude oil. If Trinity defaults, then the crude oil, which the government allocated to Trinity, should be sold, and all the money must go to Afrexim Bank. Yes, that's the security. So that's when I started now realizing, okay, what is happening now? In South Sudan, the time that I was there, crude oil was supposed to be paid in advance. Okay, you buy 600,000 barrels, but the government also said, okay, all right, give us money now. It's up to you to arrange with the extractive companies, because that's our oil. We'll allocate that oil to you, we'll give that to you. But first of all, you have to give us what? You have to give us the money in advance. Guess what? When I was in ground, the government of South Sudan allocated crude oil worth 4 billion South Sudanese pounds. This was supposed to be paid in advance, but it was never paid in advance. We were paid bits by bits, bits by bits. We were collecting money from our sales of petrol and transferring that money from the bank accounts to the government of South Sudan consolidated account with the Central Bank of South Sudan. We were transferring the money from Afriland. I was personally involved in transferring the money from the banks to the government of South Sudan consolidated account. What I needed were approvals from the chairman, the chief executive officer, the director. I was not an agent of the bank. I was neither a signatory to the bank. I never had that opportunity. My role as a finance manager was to review the records, prepare the records, and have those records properly authorized and approved. So when I was going to the bank, everyone was aware of the transactions that I was doing. And banks were confirming with the authorized signatories. So there was no transaction that I could do with the bank without the bank informing the signatories. That's impossible, right? That's the normal procedure. We were transferring funds. I would write a letter, get it to the chairman, sign it, get to the CEO, sign it, get to the director, sign it. We are transferring so much money to the Bank of South Sudan for the repayment of the loan, the 4 billion loan. In fact, this is the loan that was supposed to be paid in advance. But it was in paper that it should be paid in advance. But practically, which was contrary to what was agreed with the South Sudanese government, or what happens to the oil sales. I don't know how they maneuver this system, but we are paying in bits and bits. It's up to the company to explain how did they manage to get an advance payment to turn into a loan and to pay in installments. And the deadline for this loan was November. We were supposed to, by November 2018, we were supposed to clear 4 billion South Sudanese pounds for the crude oil, which I personally signed the invoices as well. That was one of the transactions which also surprised me. And I was working hand in hand with the Ministry of Finance, reconciling, updating management on how much money have we paid so far on that 4 billion, and how much money is still outstanding. In October, we had too much pressure because there was pressure coming from the government. I knew that there were questions somewhere to say, what is happening with this 4 billion? Because this 4 billion was supposed to be paid in advance. I know that there were some eyes in the government. So there was so much pressure that we are supposed to clear this loan as fast as possible. And how the South Sudan market was moving, you'd find that there were a lot of dollars in the market than few South Sudanese pounds. There are certain times there are a lot of South Sudanese pounds on the market and then few dollars. But most of our sales for the wholesale trucks, we were selling them in dollars. We were not selling them in South Sudan pounds. And at this time in October, we had a lot of dollars which we were supposed to collect from our customers. Now, Ako Emmanuel Ayimadut had an arrangement with the Muhammad Ogra of Moonlight to collect dollars from us, exchange those dollars in the black market, and collect South Sudanese pounds from the black market and deposit this money into our bank accounts. I was given the responsibility to collect the dollars and hand it over to Muhammad Oga. Muhammad Oga was not supposed to give me any South Sudanese pounds. He was supposed to deposit the money back into the bank accounts. I was monitoring the bank accounts each and every time. So by the time that I'm releasing South Sudanese pounds, I would cross-check with Muhammad to say, we have received so much South Sudanese pounds. And I would arrange, collect the dollars and hand it over to him. The exchange rate was agreed by the body. So this was a black market transaction. I would collect money from the customers, issue receipt to the customers. In fact, I assigned a debtor's assistant to collect money on behalf of the company. When he collects money, issuing the receipts, we will review that the money has been collected. We inform the chief executive officer the money has been collected. I will take that money, hand it over to Muhammad Oga, issue a receipt to Muhammad Oga, and update on a daily basis, inform management, directors, the chairman, informing him how much dollars have we handed over to Muhammad, how much South Sudanese pounds has been debited into our bank accounts. We had to make sure that we have raised enough funds and we are paying the government back the $4 billion from the crude oil. Okay. Now, this is the time when I started now realizing a number of transactions that were being done. One, there were bank accounts that were opened in Kenya, and all the money for the crude oil was going to those bank accounts. Because we did not have enough money from our sales of petrol and diesel in South Sudan. And at this time, some of the shippings were done and were paid for by Glencore. The company used some of the funds from these bank accounts to pay back to the 4 billion South Sudanese pounds crude oil loan. And during this period, there were a lot of funny transactions, illegal transactions that were being done. Number one, I've told you that we were getting our dollar sales, converting using the black market, and then depositing into our accounts and paying the government. There was a time where I sat down with management, with Ako Emmanuel, when I told him to say, I have been with banks, I talk with the banks. We can easily get our dollars, they can sell our dollars at a very good exchange rate, legally, and then we can pay the government. They said, is that possible? I said, yeah, that is possible. I went to KCB at Bulu Blanche. I sat down with even the general manager of KCB Bank, as well as the Forex people at KCB Bank. They saw my face. I had meetings with them. They were happy to sell, to buy our dollars. And they bought our dollars at a very good rate. And the chairman was very surprised to say, Biswick, how did you manage to negotiate with the bank? I said, this is possible. The bank told me about this. But when I was doing this, I never knew I was also stepping on the tail of the snake. Remember? I'm stepping tails of the snake. I'm stepping on a number of tails of the snake. So I was able to negotiate with them. We had a problem with the bank. there was just a slight delay to say, let us raise some South Sudanese pounds and then we'll be able to buy these other dollars. And at that time, I think that's when the chairman negotiated with Muhammad Oka to buy from the black market. I have a schedule with me which will share, which details out how many dollars we sent to Muhammad Oka and how much South Sudanese pounds were deposited. The loan was huge. The amount of money was not enough from ourselves. What else did the company do? They still wanted to use Muhammad Oka to buy South Sudanese pounds from the black market. So they created a lot of invoices as if we have bought items outside South Sudan, so that they will send the dollars to that company, and in that company, like we are making a payment for an import in dollars. So that person will receive dollars and will take the dollars and deposit to our bank account. So there were a number of invoices which were created to facilitate that transaction. And those transactions were done by Suwaran Pande in Kenya, because he was a group finance manager, working hand in hand with Ako, Emmanuel Ayi and Muhammad Oka. So there were a number of invoices to facilitate, to make as much money as possible to repay the 4 billion loan, because there was so much pressure from the government to resettle this loan. There were instances whereby I was literally told by Suwaran Pande to tell me to say, Biswick, there is no way you can do business in South Sudan without corrupting government officials. That's why we request for business acquisitions, money. Because there were requests to my office on transactions that do not make any sense. Can you prepare $10 million? Can you please prepare 10 million South Sudanese pounds for business acquisition? I have letters with me which were written requesting money for business acquisition. When you ask them, what is the just, why don't we have proper records supporting this? They never provided that information. That money was being paid to government officials. There was a time when Richard Raja was going to New York to submit a bid to supply oil for United Nations in South Sudan. They requested for $25,000 cash. And I said, your ticket is being paid by the company. You are going to New York only for a week. Why do you need $25,000? I received an email from Suwaran Pande, an Indian who is also related to Richard Raja, saying, why are you asking for the director's expenses? I told them, at the end of the day, it's me who will be answering, because there are some other transactions that by the look of the eye, it raises some discomfort to the auditors to say, someone is traveling to New York to bid for a tender of supply of oil, and this person is staying in New York for 1 week, and everything has been paid for, but he's traveling with $25,000 hard cash. What is it for? I have to answer, and this is the right time for me to have answers. I cannot have answers when I'm being audited. This is the right time to have answers. I didn't know that when I was saying all those things, I was stepping on the tails of a cobra. There was a time when I was asked to go to the bank and withdraw $15,000. I went and withdrew $15,000 after approvals. And then he himself, Emmanuel Ayi, told me that leave the money with us here. He was with Malwar Pande, so that we will make an arrangement for the payment. We want to pay these government officials who are going to Kenya for a trade fair. I said, no. It's high time now. I need to know this. I'm the one that was given the responsibility of the finance. I need to see these people that you pay. And if possible, I want them to sign. Because my understanding is, when you are paying government officials for an activity that they're doing for the company, they have to sign. So Ako was laughing and said, okay, no problem, you make an arrangement. So I put money in the envelopes. I went into the boardroom. I paid a number of government officials. Unfortunately, they wouldn't sign, and I couldn't force them to sign. But the trade fair wasn't done. And I remember even an official from the Bank of South Sudan coming to my office in Malapia, collecting money that was remaining in the envelope. I have a vivid face of that individual. Unfortunately, I must admit that I couldn't memorize the names of these individuals. But the team, everyone was aware of what it was. These are just some of the minor transactions that were being done. But there were millions and millions of South Sudanese pounds that were withdrawn from Afriland Bank, withdrawn from KCB Bank, withdrawn from Equity Bank, which were being given to the government officials. There were money that were being collected from the filling stations. Now this is the time when I understood that they did not want an audit trail. They had to keep a lot of money in the filling stations. And then they can easily just go to the filling station, take 10 million South Sudanese pounds, put in a sack, and they hand it over to the government officials.
So, when did you become aware that this was a cobra and that it was poisonous? It makes sense from what you're saying. You go for the job with high expectations, you want to be professional, and you're realizing that, hey, they wanting me as window dressing, because behind the scenes, there is something happening which you can't live with. What happened thereafter?
I realized that things are not going well. Soon after, rejections from other members of the board. Because one of the key things that I proposed in the internal controls, I said, let us have cameras in the filling stations so that we can trace, we can have even evidence of how our funds are moving. She literally rejected. We cannot put these controls. These controls are very expensive. A camera is not expensive. So I realized, oh, something is wrong. So they had to, she was making sure that there was sabotage on the ground. She was mobilizing people in the filling stations, which she recruited to not accept the controls that were put in. That's when I realized that something is wrong. And guess what? When we were having some challenges in getting the dollars from Muhammad, in getting the dollars to Muhammad, and Muhammad is sending the money to the banks, she stood up. I said, I told you Muhammad cannot do this business. Then I realized, okay, she was the one who was operating the banks in the filling station. Because she had a lot of South Sudanese pounds, she was controlling the filling stations. She was able to buy and sell dollars using the funds that were in the filling stations. So when I wiped out all the money from the filling station, that's when I stepped on that was the first step on the program. Now, Biswick has wiped out all the money from the filling stations. Where am I going to get the money?
So they had repurposed filling stations to being places where people fill up their bank account.
Yes. Yes.
So it was a convenience store for money laundering.
Yes. For them, you would be shocked because even the dollars that are collected from the filling stations, the filling stations were the overnight banks to facilitate illegal black market exchange. Okay. So I was putting controls that were damaging their business because it was huge. They were in sacks, huge sacks, millions and millions of South Sudanese pounds, which was very strange.
Well, I'm never going to be able to go and fill my car with petrol at a filling station again and not think about your story. And I'm going to be looking to see if there are cameras and everything else. And were you getting support from anyone else in the system?
Our chief executive officer was very timid. They were threatening him.
Your fellow Malawian?
Yes, my fellow Malawian. They were so timid. I don't know, maybe I've got, because I've worked as an auditor and working as an external auditor, you issue a lot of recommendations to management.
And you've got to be assertive.
Yes.
Constantly be pushed
yes. Down. Because auditing teaches us to do what is right and to recommend what is right.
And to, in fact, blow the whistle.
Yes. Yeah, yes. If there's something wrong, that's why when you do external auditing, there's always what you call a management letter. And in that management letter, you highlight fraud, weaknesses. Even if the internal control is there, but if the internal control is weak, you highlight that.
And you have qualifications.
Yes, and you inform them and you advise what is the risk that is associated with the weakness that you have identified. And then you make a recommendation, and then you give them a timeline for implementation. And when you are doing your next audit, you also have to check. We gave you the following recommendations. Have we implemented them? Okay? And then if there is necessary for you to issue other issues, then you add to the areas which have not yet been implemented. So, like myself, I made recommendation, I put timelines, because it would give me comfort. If transactions are moving anyhow, how am I going to report for those transactions to the auditors? At the end of the day, to be the same directors who come back to me to say, Biswick, you're not doing your work. Tia, you're not doing your work. Tia, you're not doing it. So the onus was on me to be as prudent as possible to make sure that we have a proper control. Transactions are recorded. We have proper supporting and relevant documentation to support the transactions.
So the people that you had expected who could provide support with you, they were intimidated. They were fearful. How did you interpret that?
I wasn't happy with how the CEO was, because he was very timid. There was even a time when I told him, I've sat down with Ako Emmanuel, the chairman. I've told him that all the payments that were being done in the name of business acquisition, the beneficiaries should be able to sign. And he said, Biswick, how have you done that? I said, I even reached a point where I told Ako to say, if you think I'm lying, I'm not saying the truth about signatures of government officials. If you have got any government official here in South Sudan, please invite him and let's have a meeting. Ako invited a senior procurement government official. We sat down and he told Ako to say, if we are working for a private company, if we've got an assignment for the private company, all the allowances that are paid by the private company are supposed to be signed for. And we have got a schedule which highlights how much is supposed to be given as a day allowance to a given individual at a given grade. The schedule is there in the government. And secondly, if all of us are not around, the leader of delegation is the one who signs on behalf of everybody. So you could see the risk. Someone could come and say, okay, we need $15,000 we have to pay for government officials. They are doing this assignment ABC, and there is no signature. How do you know that the whole $15,000 has been paid to the government officials?
What I'm hearing you say, which is interesting, because you were having to go through it virtually alone, and now you're feeling the need to basically get it out of you and to share it with someone else. Does anybody else, have they heard you explain it in this sort of detail? Are you making peace with what happened then as a social worker? I'm listening to what you're saying, but I'm listening to what is a deeper heart to you. And what I'm hearing you say is that at last I've now got an opportunity to explain what was happening to me, because there was no one that you had alongside you at the time who could really be in any way in solidarity with you. Is that an accurate observation?
Yes, that's good. Okay. What a question. I've had discussions with a number of institutions who are also investigating on corruption issues in South Sudan. One of them is the Century.
Real leverage for peace and human rights will come when the people who benefit from war will pay a price for the damage they cause.
I've also had discussions with PLAF to discuss on this issue. But this is the time when I've been able to express fully to what has been going on in my life and what I experienced in South Sudan. I was expecting to have a candid discussion with the Minister of Foreign Affairs because there are a lot of issues that were happening, but they have been ignoring me. I thought I'll have an opportunity also to discuss with the media here in Malawi, but they have been ignoring me. My brother and I made efforts to talk to the Malawi Human Rights Commission on the same issue, but we never had any audience like the audience that we're having right now.
The reason I'm framing it like this is because my interest in this matter is I've heard the stories of many whistleblowers now, and I'm just seeing a similarity. And what I keep going back to, and I say, in life there are no such thing as problems. Problems don't exist. Only people with problems. But when you talk to the Sentry, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, CLAF, other NGOs, their institutional or organizational mission is to problematize and to find a solution. And thank goodness there are people that do it, because you are now contributing data, information, factual evidence, so that they can say, now we can prosecute problems. And so often we lose sight of the human, psychological, emotional impact that this is having on you, because your problem isn't solved. You know, the problem that they see in terms of society and the institutions of society might or might not, often not solved, because these things are so deeply systemic and corrupt. That I just want to ensure that people like you are not left on the margins, because we need a lot more people like you. There are so many potential people like you, and they're not going to want to actually come forward if they're going to feel like they're a voice crying alone in the wilderness. The honest response to a person, as I have found working with whistleblowers, when they say they've got a problem, I've had to now be honest with them and say, yes, don't worry, it's only going to get worse. How did things get worse? Tell us now from what happened when you booked your flight to Dar es Salaam.
Yes. So I made a decision to say, okay, all right, we left Malawi. I don't think our embassy is aware of our movement. Let me go to Dar es Salaam and report what has been going on here and come back. Because if I report to the embassy, at least I have given them the information. They know that our citizens are working in an institution that is very corrupt. So I decided to leave on the 25th of October 2018, heading to Dar es Salaam.
Well, a consistent theme of this series of dialogues has been the problem of power. In the previous Alethea dialogue I had with SAP's whistleblowers, Patricia Machale and Sisiwe Kuka, we explored truths about power, and you can click on the link above to watch that. We reflected on Friedrich Nietzsche's famous quote about the incarnate will to power that he believed explained human conduct in history over all times. I've since come across this quote from Carl Jung, which challenged that belief. He said, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking. The one is the shadow of the other." I actually have some empathy for the people that Tia talks about, who were his persecutors, Akil, Ayi, Anna Rutere and Richard Raja and their enablers. I would actually love to hear from them to get their perspectives. If they do contact me, and I'd welcome them, I confess that they need to know that I will be listening with an empathy that's biased in the same way as I've listened to people who are addicted to alcohol or drugs. Power is also an intoxicant, and when a person rises in power, they risk becoming addicted to the dopamine rush that power stimulates, interestingly, usually in combination with money and sex. Well, unchecked, power becomes pernicious. And when the will to power becomes the normative purpose of an organization, an institution, and even more widely as a state, well, it becomes progressively more volatile and dangerous. And if you watch all the uploads in my Alethea dialogues, it seems, at least to me, that the common thread in every dialogue that I've had so far is that power and truth seem to be fundamentally incompatible, but that the only antidote or constraint to the intoxication of power is good old-fashioned truth. Well, in my now 66 years so far, I'm absolutely convinced that if the arc of the moral universe is indeed to bend towards justice, as Martin Luther King and many others believed, well, truth matters, and it's truth that actually does the bending. All of which explains exactly why whistleblowers and, as in Tia's case, good auditors are so vitally necessary. But it also explains why they are also so persecuted. Because the only defense that corrupted power has against honest truth is to attack and retaliate. Tia's experience reconfirms that. And insofar as the Century Investigation Report reveals the truth about Trinity Energy as essentially a corrupt money laundering enterprise beneath the veneer of a network of filling stations, so will Tia's life be further endangered. While the Century have arranged a safe house for him and are proceeding apace to ensure that their investigative report is released as soon as possible, Tia is in a highly vulnerable transitional stage between being anonymous and the public recognition and protection that hopefully the media will afford. And once that comes, it's likely to deter his persecutors from taking more terminal retaliation measures. And although the Century did not disclose Tia's identity when they presented his disclosures to the Trinity directors and their enablers, they will have little doubt as to who the source was, because only Tia would have known all that has been revealed. At least when the Trinity directors see this interview in the public domain, well, they will also know that it's not only Tia who knows about their conduct, and he is in solidarity now with a group of fellow whistleblowers who have earned considerable moral authority, who are well placed not only in South Africa, but in Greece, the United Kingdom and the USA. It's time for Akol, Ai, Andrew Tere, Richard Raja, Mohammed Agla, and other enablers to know that any further retaliation will only serve to heighten suspicion and further incriminate them. A much better option will be for them to come clean. In fact, why not also become whistleblowers yourselves and experience the emancipatory power of truth? As St. Augustine says, there is no saint without a past, and there's no sinner without a future. I do believe in a restorative, redemptive process. However, when I was flying back from Lilongwe, I was challenged to be practical and not to overindulge my philosophical and moralistic tendencies, and to be careful not to rationalize the very real problem that Tia faces right now and what we must do to help him and his family. Firstly, thanks to the Century, Tia is now living in a safe house to protect him from assassination. However, the day before I left, he took me to his house in Lilongwe. It stands unfinished. It has been his ambition to use the income he was getting from Trinity in his job to build a dream home. Had he played along with them, he would have achieved that, but at the cost of his soul and his integrity. As things now stand, the municipality has cut off his water because he can't pay his account, and the property has not been properly looked after. He needs a good paying work opportunity so that his human dignity can be restored and his life be restored. If nothing else, this interview has shown that Tia is a really good chartered accountant. Too good for the unholy Trinity, if you will pardon my cynicism again, but he can offer exactly what any worthy ethical organization needs to strengthen its governance systems and accountability. And secondly, as I was getting ready to record this, I got a call from Tia to tell me that he is really desperate because he can't pay his school fees. His older daughter is not well. She needs to see a doctor. He hasn't earned money for 4 years. Trinity, in fact, still owe his salary to him till the end of his contract, which they haven't paid. He had to leave Juba in a hurry and was unable to bring back his laptop and his other belongings, which he really needs. I have connected him with a man of integrity within the Malawian government system that I happen to know, who is helping him now to get the Malawian government to get back what is owed to him by Trinity, and also to claim reparations for his torture and wrongful arrest. Tia is not interested in vengeance, but he is interested in ensuring that reparations are paid so that companies in future learn to internalize and recognize that the abuse of human environmental rights is going to cost them on their bottom lines. It's called consequence management. But that will take time. There's an immediate humanitarian issue at stake here. So in this case, mercy and justice need to combine. We need to mercifully support Tia and his family whilst pursuing justice in the more institutional sense. The third really concerning issue for me is his fundamental human needs are going to need to be well satisfied so that he can regain his sense of well-being. He needs a more specialized medical and therapeutic interventions. He is now in therapy with a clinical psychologist who is doing a great job facilitating his healing from the post-traumatic stress disorder from his 2-year ordeal. That costs money, which he simply doesn't have. So please subscribe to my channel, but more than that, if you feel lovingly stirred to help Tia solve his immediate problems, please email me on this email now appearing if you have a contribution to make, and I will explain how the support system will work. Well, to conclude, just a brief word on what to expect in the next installment. Another quote from Carl Jung speaks into Tia's problem. He said, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown." He also said elsewhere, "You cannot change anything unless you accept it." In the next installment, you will hear that his month spent in the notorious Macherechere prison in Kigali took Tia across an important psychological threshold, attitudinally, to accept the reality of what was happening to him, which then opened a way for him to creatively turn the tables on his persecutors by finding a new life force on the horizon that carried him through the ordeal and to then outgrow that immediate problem. And it reminded me of that line from the US novelist James Baldwin, who said, "One must say yes to life and embrace it wherever it's found, and it is found in terrible places. Nevertheless, there it is." Paradoxically, by unlawfully imprisoning him for a month in Macherechere prison, his persecutors actually empowered him because he found many other well-educated and experienced people who helped him wise up to what was really happening and come to that acceptance. And amongst them was a police commissioner, several lawyers, and even a judge. So you can look forward to hearing that astonishing irony. Finally, thank you to those friends in my network who have, at very short notice, rallied together to fund my trip to Malawi. And also thank that poor woman, the Home Affairs, who I pestered to help me get my new passport in record time. I got the passport within 3 hours of my departure. Ngiyabonga kakhulu. Thank you. And please don't hesitate to help me spread this video, to pass comments, to make this not just a private but a public matter, because that's what it is. If we're ever going to deal with this massive systemic problem of corruption, I can see no other way of that happening without whistleblowers who are protected and supported. They cannot be expected to continue to bear the unbearable burden alone.